My name is Rachel Bennett, and I'm 28 years old. I need to tell you about the night I found out exactly who would show up for me, and it wasn't who I expected. It was a Tuesday, just after 1 in the morning, when my body basically betrayed me without any warning. All evening I'd felt this nagging tightness low on my left side, and honestly, I brushed it off as nothing more than bad takeout catching up with me. But somewhere around 1 a.m., that tightness twisted into something else entirely, something so sharp it dropped me straight to my knees on the bathroom tile. I couldn't get a full breath in. My whole shirt was soaked through with sweat, my hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I remember clutching the edge of the tub, catching a glimpse of myself in the mirror and barely recognizing the terrified person staring back. Some deep, animal part of my brain knew this wasn't something I could sleep off. I reached for my phone and dialed my mother first. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same thing. Then I called my father, and it rang twice before dumping me into his voicemail too. I kept alternating between the two of them, my thumb slipping on the screen because my hands were trembling so hard. By the time I hit my 14th or 15th attempt, I was flat on my back on the kitchen floor, phone against my ear, listening to my dad's same tired greeting over and over. "You've reached Michael Bennett, leave a message after the tone." I left 3 voicemails. The last one barely made sense, because I was sobbing too hard to form full sentences. All I remember saying was something like, "Dad, please. I don't think I'm okay. I need somebody." Neither of them ever called back that night. I only pieced together what happened next because the paramedics filled me in afterward. My neighbor from 2 doors down, a woman named Carol, who I'd maybe waved to a handful of times in 3 years of living there, heard everything through our shared wall. She heard me hit the floor. She's the one who dialed 911, without hesitation. By the time help arrived, I was slipping in and out of consciousness. The paramedics later told me that whatever was going on inside me had ruptured, and if I'd stayed on that floor even half an hour longer, they weren't confident I'd have made it. Nobody used the word died out loud, but I understood exactly what they were tiptoeing around. They rushed me straight into emergency surgery. And at some point, on that operating table, my heart actually stopped. I flatlined. The surgical team worked to bring me back, and they did, but for a stretch of time, however brief, I was technically gone. There was no tunnel of light, no voices calling me toward anything. Just a silence so total, it didn't even feel like silence, it felt like nothing at all. And then, all at once, sound crashed back in. Beeping monitors, someone shouting my name, and this crushing, bruising pain in my chest from the compressions that had just saved my life. When I finally surfaced in recovery, foggy and disoriented, a nurse was sitting near my bed. The first thing I asked was whether my parents had come. Something flickered across her face, an expression I still can't quite name, but it sat somewhere close to pity. She told me my emergency contacts had been reached, and that yes, someone had shown up at the hospital that night. Before she could say more, the surgeon stepped into the room. His name was Dr. Alan Whitfield, a soft-spoken man with kind, exhausted eyes. He pulled a chair beside my bed instead of standing at the foot of it, which told me immediately this wasn't going to be a routine check-in. He said, "Rachel, it was a serious night. We came very close to losing you." I nodded, because I already understood that much in my bones. Then he said something I was nowhere near ready to hear. He told me a woman claiming to be my mother had come to the hospital and had tried to have me discharged early, that same night, only hours after I'd flatlined on a table. I asked him to repeat himself, because surely I'd misunderstood. He hadn't misspoken. He explained that the staff told her discharge wasn't remotely possible given my condition, and that she'd pushed back, gotten combative with them over it. The room felt like it tilted sideways under me. Then he paused, glanced toward the doorway, and added, almost like an afterthought, but the man who covered your bill said, and before he could finish that sentence, the door opened. Standing there was someone I had never laid eyes on in my life. A man, maybe mid-50s, solidly built, wearing a plain navy jacket, like he'd grabbed it off a hook without thinking twice. His eyes had this quiet heaviness to them, the kind that comes from having lived through things. He didn't carry himself like someone important or wealthy. He looked, honestly, like somebody's steady, unremarkable uncle. He stepped in slowly, almost like he needed permission just to be standing there. Dr. Whitfield rose, gave him a small, respectful nod, and quietly excused himself, leaving just the two of us. I tugged my blanket up a little, more from instinct than modesty, and asked who he was. He sat down in the chair the doctor had just left, and folded his hands in his lap before answering. He told me his name was Walter Pierce. He said he'd been at the hospital that night, visiting his younger brother on another floor, and he'd overheard some kind of scene unfolding at the front desk. A woman, my mother, had been loudly insisting the staff release me, because, and he repeated this part carefully, like he wanted to make sure I heard it right, my sister's engagement dinner was happening the next morning, and the whole family needed to be rested and present. The nurses had refused, explaining I was in critical condition and that discharging me could genuinely kill me. According to Walter, my mother's next move was to ask if there was some form she could sign to override the medical staff's decision entirely. He'd watched all of it unfold from across the waiting area, a total stranger to any of us, and something in him just shifted. He asked a nearby nurse, quietly, what was going on with the patient in question. She couldn't share specifics, obviously, but Walter had seen enough on his own. He'd seen that nobody stayed behind to sit with me. He watched my mother walk straight out the front doors. So he went to the billing office and asked about my situation. When he found out I had no one present, and that a gap in my insurance was about to trigger a hold on my continued treatment, he quietly paid it himself. Just like that. A man I'd never met made sure the hospital could keep treating me, without a single administrative delay. I didn't have words for him. I genuinely didn't. I'd just learned that my own mother tried to pull me out of a hospital bed the same night my heart had stopped, so she wouldn't miss an engagement dinner. And now this stranger, whose last name I hadn't known 10 minutes earlier, was sitting beside me explaining, almost sheepishly, that he'd quietly made sure I stayed alive. I broke down crying, not the pretty kind, the kind that comes up from somewhere you usually keep sealed shut. Walter didn't try to fix it or tell me it was okay. He just stayed there with me, which turned out to be exactly what I needed. My parents finally showed up later that afternoon. My mom walked in first, and her opening line was that her phone had been on silent, that's why she missed the calls. 14 missed calls, and she hadn't heard a single one. Then she glanced around the room and asked about the flowers on the windowsill, the ones Walter had quietly left before heading back up to sit with his brother. I told her a stranger had brought them. She just said, "That's strange," and never once asked why a stranger had been involved in the first place. My dad stood near the doorway the entire visit, arms folded, nodding along to whatever my mom said, never once pulling up a chair to sit near me. They stayed maybe half an hour before leaving, because, in my mom's words, there was still cleanup to handle from the engagement dinner. She mentioned my sister had had a beautiful morning, and that I really would have loved being there. After they left, lying alone in that hospital bed, I made a decision so quietly and so clearly, it almost caught me off guard. I decided I was done twisting myself into shapes to fit into a family that had never made room for me in the first place. Walter came back to visit 2 more times before I was discharged. On his last visit, he brought his wife, a gentle woman named Loretta, who took my hand and told me, "You have people, honey. You just haven't met all of them yet." I still think about that sentence more days than not. I found out afterward, through one of the nurses, that Walter had also formally reported my mother's attempted discharge to the hospital's patient advocacy department. He never mentioned it himself. He wasn't the type who needed credit for doing the right thing. But the hospital had it on record now, meaning if anything had gone wrong that night because of outside interference, there would be documentation of exactly what happened. I've fully recovered since then. My relationship with my parents is something I'm still working through, honestly, but the fog cleared on who they actually are, versus who I always needed them to be. Those turned out to be two completely different people, and for years, I'd confused one for the other. Walter and Loretta, though, they've become real family to me. The kind built out of showing up and staying, not the kind built out of shared blood or obligation. If this story found its way to you today, I want you to sit with this for a second. The people who show up for you in your worst, darkest moments, even strangers, even quietly, even when nobody asked them to, those are the people who actually show you what love looks like in practice. And sometimes it takes almost losing everything to finally see whose hands were holding you up all along, and whose never really were. If this story moved you even a little, please consider subscribing to this channel. Every week we share real stories about survival, heartbreak, unexpected kindness, and the kind of quiet human strength that never makes the news but absolutely deserves to be heard. Hit subscribe, turn on your notifications, and join a community that believes stories like this one matter. You showing up here means something, and so does every story we choose to tell. This one's for anyone who's ever called out for help and gotten nothing back but silence. You are not forgotten.